This is something I've thought about way too much. And the first moment that I really started thinking about this was when I was watching a video from Kaplan America showing off the same vintage Triumph that I would ultimately end up getting. And in that video, he says this.
It's light, fast, fun, reliable, and affordable. So what's not to love about it? And a great investment too, surely to outpace the stock market. These things are going up in value every day. So unlike a new bike, this is going to appreciate. So
now, just as a counter to this notion, let me play an old clip from the Two Enthusiasts podcast regarding motorcycles as investments.
So it's going to be a CC, Claudio Castiglione version, which is what they made probably about 10 years ago, maybe 11 or 12 years ago. Exactly. 2006. I had one in the pre-owned department of Motocorsa. It had sold for 125,000 new. We were selling it. In fact, I think we sold it for 50,000 with like 60 miles on it. I got to ride it.
That's
it was
so brutal.
Unreal. Well, but that's, what a lot of these things are. I mean, it's not.
But if you read the latest Cycle World, Quentin, you would know that investing in motorcycles is a better investment than Bitcoin.
That's bizarre. Where did you read that?
That's a story.
In Cycle World?
And it's literally, it's got to be advertisement because it's one big Botham's auction jerk off.
Yeah, there it is. Okay, yeah. I was like, why would they say something that ludicrous?
Yeah.
Right. We've touched on this, like, wow, the RC30 is worth maybe 35 or 40 grand now. Yeah. How much was 15 grand worth in 1990?
Like, if you got the right Brough Superior, the right Vincent, even inflated for...
If you could spend $250,000 on a motorcycle, maybe you could make it some money out of it. Yeah, no, it makes no sense.
I would love to break down the actual time value of money on that. It's so insane.
Now, this might not make sense, but I actually think that both of these ideas are correct in some way. It is true that an old motorcycle is a better investment for the most part than a new motorcycle, but it's also true that motorcycles aren't good investments in the way that most people think. So let me explain. First, we have to define what a good investment is. And though I don't pretend to be an expert on investing, I can share a bit of my own recent experience. Amidst the stock market crash of 2020, I started investing in two things, and this turned out to be good timing for me. I invested in the stock market in general. This was the first time I'd really started investing, with most of that money being allocated between a few companies like Tesla and Amazon and a few others. Well, actually about half of that money was invested into those companies, and then the other half was invested into an index fund, which is just basically general investing. Like, you could see the index fund as like the stock market in general. And this would be considered very high risk investing, but I don't know, I don't really see it that way. But anyways, it's paid off really well because of Tesla. Let's be real. On the other hand, I started investing some other money into crypto and mainly Bitcoin, which has also paid off. I believe Bitcoin was worth like 6,000 or 7,000 when I started investing in about March of 2020, or maybe it was May of 2020, I don't remember. But right now, Bitcoin is sitting around 60,000, so that's been a really good investment. Now, if you want to compare something like that to investing in any motorcycle, literally any vintage, classic, rare, whatever motorcycle, to what I've done with crypto and the stock market, then no, motorcycles are not good investments in that way. They will never be able to bring in 20 or 10 or even 5% growth in a year. It is possible if you happen to, say, get a Harley-Davidson knucklehead at the exact right time, because those did kind of skyrocket in a matter of a few years. But it's almost entirely impossible to predict something like that, and it almost never happens. Now, this doesn't mean that motorcycles are a bad place to put your money. They're just not the kind of investment that we often think that they are. Even when the stock market is having a more normal year, for example, let's say it goes up 5% or so a year, you just aren't going to get that kind of growth from a motorcycle or from a collection of motorcycles, more than likely. Let's take my old Triumph for example. This bike cost me $6,800, and that's honestly about what it's worth. It's not a museum quality motorcycle, but it is a really nice survivor, and there's a lot of parts to it that are really nice. There's almost no rust. The color isn't right. It was restored in the 90s. It's not 100% original. Now think about this. In 1968, when this motorcycle came out, the MSRP was $1,117 US. Now, if we do a quick inflation calculation, you see that's about $8,800 today, which is roughly what my bike is worth if it were in like basically brand new condition or museum level condition, maybe a little bit more, maybe like 9 or 10. So if you bought this bike in 1968 and you kept it in absolutely pristine original condition, you didn't ride it a whole lot, like hardly at all, there's a good chance you would get, that 9,000 or more back on it, depending on how well you kept it. In fact, a few years back, these actually were going for quite a bit more. These could sell for $12,000 or something like that. The values dropped a bit, but essentially, you wouldn't really be getting anything for your money. Let's say you made a couple thousand. Let's say you bought it for $1,100 in 1968 and it's worth $10,000 now. So you've made $1,000 or so on it once you do all the inflation calculation. $1,000 invested in the stock market in general in 1968 would have made you a lot more than that. Let's just put it that way, like way more. Now, there's a few things that we can take away from this. First, it's probably not a good idea to buy a brand new motorcycle and expect it to be worth a whole lot more than when you bought it, even 40 years later. Now, there's some exceptions to that, but for the most part, that's the case. The second thing is that if you want to buy a bike like mine and you want it to be a good investment, there's a right time to purchase it, namely about 25 years or so after it's been released, maybe 20 years, depending on what the bike is. 25 years ago, these bikes weren't really as collectible as they are now, and you would have gotten a decent return on your investment. Not great, but like a minor return. Now, this gets to my main point, and it's this. Motorcycles can be a good store of value, but they're not a great investment. A store of value is essentially something that would retain its purchasing power in the future. A dollar, for example, is a terrible store of value as it deflates constantly, and sometimes rapidly, whereas a dollar's worth of gold could be a good store of value over the next 50 years. It holds its value, might even go up a bit in value. It's not going to go up like the stock market does, but it's a good place to put your money generally, at least it has been. People who store large sums of cash in random parts of their house, yeah, that's a stupid idea. Just like holding any form of cash is a bad move historically. Many people store their money in assets, things like property, gold, Bitcoin has been a really great store of value and even an investment over the past few years. Rental property, which is great because it actually pays you. And yes, some people store their money in automobiles. But again, you have to do this right. You have to buy them at the right time and you have to keep them for a very, very, very long time, and you have to take care of them. So the first thing is, don't buy brand new motorcycles ever. Well, buy a brand new motorcycle if you really want one. Just know it's not a good investment. Just like most new cars are bad investments. But if you want that new truck, like, I don't know. This is why I could never bring myself to buy a brand new truck or a brand new car. I can't drop $60,000 on something that's going to be worth like $20,000 in 10 years. That just seems like a bad investment. What good old Kaplan America says in his video is right. That new motorcycle is going to go down in value rapidly. An old motorcycle probably won't go down in value. It's probably going to go up in value. But when he says it's going to outpace the stock market, that is absolutely not true. But this doesn't mean you have to buy a 70-year-old clunker motorcycle. There's lots of cool, fun motorcycles that are great stores of value, in my opinion. One that I've been looking at recently is the original first generation of MV Agusta F4s. This is an iconic motorcycle, arguably the most beautiful motorcycle of all time. And guess what? They're not that expensive, especially here in the US. Are they very hard to find? Yes, absolutely. But look at what they cost, if you do find one, compared to when they came out. Let's say you find an original F4 750 in really good condition. Let's say it's a 2000, like that's the year, and you buy it for $10,000. A bit pricey, but they are kind of starting to go up in value. In 2000, that bike was $30,000 US dollars. That's close to $50,000 today. And you're getting it for around $10K. Inevitably, that legendary motorcycle is going to start going up in value, and it has started to. 40 years from now, that will have been, at the very least, a really good store of value. Maybe a good investment, maybe a decent investment, but at the very least, it should hold its value in line with inflation, which is why that's a bike that does interest me personally, because it's a vintage bike, it's a classic bike, sort of, but it's also a fun, awesome, proper motorcycle. It's still fast. Oh, and it sounds like a Ferrari. The big thing is motorcycles are a store of value that are way more fun, in my opinion, than gold or land. They're something that you get to interact with, you get to take care of, you get to enjoy. I mean, I guess you can do that with land, but for me, I'd pick a motorcycle. You get to enjoy them, you get to build memories with them, you get to share them with people, let other people ride them or just admire them. So in that way, I think of motorcycles as not great investments, but they are fun investments. Now, if you want to get into something like this with as little money as possible, I would recommend getting an early 1970s Honda, maybe something like a Honda CB125 or a CB350. You can get an absolutely pristine one of these for, maybe $2,000-$3,000, maybe even less than that. In the case of the 125, the CB125, that's a single cylinder bike that's actually faster than a Grom, way cooler than a Grom in my opinion, and absolutely bulletproof. You can actually ride it. You don't need to hide it in your garage. You can put miles on those bikes. Currently, a lot of those Hondas from the 70s are at a very low value, besides of course the CB750, but they are starting to go up. They're all starting to go up at this point. So it's a good time to get into buying one. Again, I'm not a licensed financial guy, so don't take my word for it. This is just my thinking. Basically, don't sue me. One last thing we should talk about, and it relates to what was said on the Two Enthusiasts podcast earlier. Well, yeah, a few things. First, don't buy a new limited edition motorcycle unless you plan on keeping it for 50 or 60 years. Even still, it's not the best route to go. Even if you do keep it that long, you're much better off waiting about 10, 15 years and getting one of those special different motorcycles that somebody has put up for sale at a huge loss. Let's say they bought it new for $80,000 and now it's being sold for $50,000, or maybe they bought it for $30,000 and now it's being sold for $11,000 or something like that. But with these special limited edition bikes, I have a feeling that a lot of them aren't going to be worth any more than the production versions. For example, the gold striped Bonnevilles. I don't know. I don't think those are going to be super rare and valuable. That's just a paint job essentially. Whereas a Desmos Adichie RR or a limited edition Tamburini MV Agusta F4 or Claudio F4, these are limited edition bikes that have meaningful performance changes and unbelievable paint jobs and carbon wheels. Look at the MV Agusta Brutale Nuremberg. That's a bike that will be worth something someday. But if you buy it brand new, I just wouldn't go that route. But yeah, any bike that costs as much as a small house, like the F4 Claudio, the first one was $120,000 or something like that when it came out in 2010, I believe, which is absolutely insane. But yeah, any bike that costs as much as a house is gonna also cost as much as a house in the future. But it's much simpler to go for the bikes that are already old that may, begin to go up in value in the next 20 or 30 years. Personally, I think that the original Triumphs, like the one that I have, I think that 40 years from now, people are going to look back at those bikes and see them as iconic. I mean, they're already iconic, but as really the motorcycles that started it all in terms of look and just some of the most beautiful motorcycles of all time. So I think they're at least a good investment for a motorcycle. All of this stems from my desire to not buy things that go down in value. I just don't like it. I don't like the idea of spending $15,000 on a new motorcycle that in a matter of years is going to be worth $5,000. I would rather buy something cool and iconic and interesting and old that is fun, that I can keep for 30 or 40 years, pass on to my kids, that will be, something really awesome and be worth something someday. So anyways, those are my thoughts. I would love to hear from you guys. A lot of you guys who watch my videos and comment are way smarter than me. So I would love to hear from you guys in the comments below. Have you invested in motorcycles? I know some of you have some pretty cool collections. Have they gone up in value? And what are your thoughts on this topic? All right, guys, hope you are riding safe. We'll see you in the next one. Peace out.